I arrived on the third planet of the Sol system wearing silk-thin protective shielding and thicker layers of contempt. Humans, they called themselves that, were still in the infancy of interstellar etiquette. They offered me coffee and donuts during the opening of our diplomatic summit, both of which I consumed only out of fear that declining might be seen as warlike. The donut, I confess, was offensive in both texture and color. It resembled a neutron pastry filled with sugar and existential despair. Their leader, President something, made a speech filled with trembling pride and practiced humility. I tuned out after the phrase, "one small step for man," which they repeated with nauseating reverence, as if planting a flag on their moon made them relevant. I represented the Enkalari, 12,000 years of evolution, control over quantum echo drives, and an annual cultural festival where we bend the speed of light for entertainment. My presence on Earth was not necessity, it was amusement. Still, I had my orders. Observe, report, smile if possible. Do not incinerate anyone unless provoked thrice. Earth had become a curiosity, like a glowing fungus discovered under one's furniture. Humanity had survived its adolescence, nuclear flirtations, biological errors, climate tantrums, and had just now stepped into the galactic foyer. And like every new species, they believed themselves exceptional. It was adorable. What I didn't expect, what no one expected, was the mention of it. The council called it the living armor, an ancient artifact from the extincts, those long-lost godlike engineers who vanished before my kind even shed our aquatic phase. The armor was a living exosuit, a biological technological hybrid capable of merging with the most compatible mind across the galaxy. It had wandered for centuries, perhaps millennia, appearing here and there. It had rejected warriors from the Wern, philosophers of the Sothari, and even our own Enkalari first descendants. Each attempt ended the same way, rejection or death. It hadn't been seen in 2 centuries. Many believed it dormant, drifting in forgotten space like a sulking deity. But rumors, always rumors, whispered that it had awakened again. I chuckled over it while sipping more of Earth's acidic bean water. Let the other diplomats panic over ancient trinkets. Earth wasn't even on the short list of potential contact points. After all, the armor required intelligence, discipline, and psychic resilience. What could possibly interest it on a planet where half the population still believed in horoscopes? Oh, the sweet blindness of pride. I had just finished insulting the architecture of their United Nations building when the real show began. You see, the thing about young species is, they're like puppies, clumsy, loud, prone to accidents involving furniture and foreign policy. But sometimes, just sometimes, they bite something they weren't supposed to, something sacred. That something in this case was an encoded pulse, a signal. Weak, erratic, yet unmistakable. The living armor had awakened. I found out over dinner. The Vargothi delegate, a sentient mass of gas and smugness, froze mid-hover when the encrypted message reached his neural comms. The usually unreadable gelatinous shimmer of his form dimmed noticeably. That was the moment I knew. The rumors were true. The armor was active. And worse, it was moving. The trajectory was distressing. It was heading for the Sol system, our system, Earth. Oh, how quickly arrogance decays in the face of irony. By morning, the Earth Summit had transformed from a polite diplomatic backpatting festival into a feral marketplace. Delegates from over 17 species suddenly had business on Earth. Some disguised it with weak justifications: trade, tourism, agricultural consulting. Others didn't bother at all. A bidding war began. Not for land, not for weapons, no, for influence. The idea was simple. If the armor was headed toward Earth, and Earth was as primitive as we all believed, then surely it would not bind with them, but might still land here. If one could secure Earth as a proxy, build a research station, or a diplomatic base, one might control the site where the armor reappeared, and maybe, just maybe, try another host. Of course, no one actually said this aloud. To imply one sought to use a sovereign species as bait for a god-tech artifact was distasteful. So instead, we wrapped it in pleasant terms: strategic partnerships, shared defense platforms, technology exchange. I suggested we gift them a decommissioned gravity forge. The humans, having no idea what that was, clapped enthusiastically. One of them asked if it could be used to make pancakes. I nodded. He clapped again. Behind the scenes, we watched the skies. More troubling. The signal was slowing, oscillating, targeting. Even I began to feel it. A subtle tremor in the psychic layer of space. A presence drawing nearer. Something. Aware. And then, something happened that chilled even my 3 hearts. A human soldier, clad in crude armor, clearly unaware of any galactic mysteries, passed close to the tracking array during a military demonstration. His name was broadcast briefly through local channels. Lieutenant Mason Hale. At that precise moment, the armor's signal shifted frequency, matching the brainwave patterns we intercepted from his biometric ID badge. It was absurd, impossible, laughable. It was also real. I watched the charts. The armor was no longer drifting randomly. It was coming to Earth, and it was coming for him. The first death came within 6 minutes of arrival. Not on Earth, no. We weren't that lucky. The living armor, now fully awake and apparently sentient, was no longer floating like some ancient derelict. It accelerated as if fueled by intent, bypassed every attempted intercept drone, and dropped into orbit over Earth with all the subtlety of a divine hammer. 3 candidates had been prepared, 3 of the galaxy's most promising minds, each selected to attempt communion with the armor as soon as it entered our sector. I remember them all. First was a Jerkin battle sage, whose mind had survived a psychic implosion during the Telros Rebellion. He stood over 3 meters tall, could melt steel with a touch, and once held off a fleet using nothing but his voice. He died screaming. The armor encased him briefly, like a child might try on a glove, then recoiled. His body burned from within, imploded, and left nothing but scorched bone and diplomatic awkwardness. The second was worse. A Zalathi monk, chosen for his universal empathy, managed to commune with the armor for just under 12 seconds. During that time, his eyes turned to mirrors. His skin shifted through a dozen languages, and he whispered, "Not you, not this." Then he tore his own mind apart. The third didn't even make contact. The armor dodged him. This wasn't trial and error. This was rejection, active, conscious, and increasingly violent. I stood on Earth's orbital station, watching this unfold, my arrogance melting like frost before fire. I had mocked the idea that the armor could ever want humanity. Now, I was watching it eliminate beings we considered apex specimens, as if they were flies offering themselves to a forge. And then it fell. The armor dropped like a comet, no warning, no grace, just raw precision, and landed on the eastern coast of the North American continent, in the middle of a military training field. I saw the footage later. There he was, Lieutenant Mason Hale, unaware, unimpressed, and deeply confused. He was in the middle of a live fire drill when the sky cracked open, and a molten sphere of light slammed into the dirt 10 paces from his squad. Panic? Naturally. Soldiers scattered, sirens wailed, communications blacked out. But Mason didn't run. He stared, not with fear, with something between curiosity and irritation, like a man who'd just seen a vending machine eat his money. The armor responded. It unfolded like liquid obsidian, slithering toward him not like a predator, but like a question. Mason stepped forward once, uncertain, then again, slower, and it let him. The armor reached up, suspended for a breathless moment. And then, contact. There was no rejection, no death, no explosion. Instead, the entire training field went silent. Instruments within 1,000 kilometers flatlined. The clouds above stopped moving, and Mason Hale, ordinary human, approximate intellect, average service record, stood enveloped in ancient alien war armor that had destroyed minds older than his species. I do not remember breathing for several minutes. The armor had chosen. There are moments in one's life that become anchors, points from which time stretches either forward or backward, but never escapes. Watching that human become chosen by the armor, that was mine. The bonding itself was almost gentle. No screams, no psychic implosions, no blood seeping through cracks in the universe. Instead, The armor unfolded over Mason Hale like a cloak made of intelligent shadow. Panels flowed along his limbs, nested around his chest, and locked into place with the subtlety of breath. Instruments around the impact site registered a gravitational ripple. Temperatures dropped by 4 degrees Celsius. Time for a heartbeat staggered, and then he spoke. "Is this supposed to be happening?" That was it. His first words after becoming the host of a galactic relic capable of ending worlds. Not "what is this?" Not "who am I?" Just an annoyed, dry-toned question that suggested he had once tried to assemble IKEA furniture and had experienced something similar. It unnerved me. Worse, the armor responded. Its surface shifted. Symbols emerged, flowed, restructured, adapting not to galactic standard, but to English. Crude, irregular, Earth-based English. Bond complete, it said. Host viable. Sync optimal. At that moment, every major power across the galaxy opened emergency communications. Half the council demanded the armor be surrendered immediately. The other half denied it had ever existed in the first place. Earth's response? Hysterical, patriotic media coverage. Talk shows. The president issued a brief address emphasizing peace, calm, and national pride, then immediately approved an orbital lockdown and tripled military presence around the site. Mason Hale was taken into secure containment, though the term secure was theoretical. The armor didn't come off. It didn't power down. It simply remained, quiet, alert, and occasionally shifting its surface like it was thinking. And Mason? He napped. Yes, truly. Slept. Said he was tired. Scientists tried to scan him. The armor melted their instruments. A brave diplomat from the Tarak tried to touch his shoulder. The armor flared once and teleported her to the roof. No harm, just a warning. I tried to speak to him once. Asked him what it felt like. He shrugged. Sore. Like I ran a marathon with a robot backpack that thinks too much. That was the moment I realized we had made a mistake. No, not a mistake. A miscalculation spanning millennia. We'd spent ages assuming the armor was seeking strength, intellect, mental clarity. But maybe it was looking for something else. Flexibility, unpredictability, adaptability, things that made humans so dangerous. The first attempt to contain the situation lasted 12 minutes. It began with a soft, diplomatic knock and ended with a crater. The Varn Consortium, ever subtle in their imperial arrogance, sent a delegation to escort Mason Hale to an orbital research vessel. Their ship, bristling with cloaked neurosuppressants and precision beam cannons, hovered just outside Earth's jurisdiction, and then violated it. The humans had not approved the extraction. They were, to their credit, still operating under the naive assumption that polite dialogue could outpace greed. They were wrong. The Varn teleportation attempt failed. The armor detected it before the signal even finished calibrating. For a moment, the sky dimmed. Then came the response. Mason was asleep. Yes, asleep. The armor acted entirely on its own. A kinetic pulse exploded outward from his location. It didn't kill. No scorched earth. No mangled bodies. Just one clean, devastating message. Do not try that again. The Varn ship lost control of its gravitic field and crash-landed in the Atlantic Ocean. No casualties. Miraculously. But Earth had received its first interstellar scar. And Mason Hale woke up annoyed. They interrupted my dream, he muttered, rubbing his eyes as the armor folded neatly into standby form around him. You must understand. This was not just a diplomatic incident. This was a shift. The humans didn't ask for help. They didn't beg the council to intervene. Instead, their response was unmistakably human. A press conference, a flag behind a podium. A tired general with too many medals stood before the world and the stars and said the words that would haunt the elder species for decades. We didn't provoke this. We didn't invite this. But we're not giving him up. Mason Hale is a citizen of Earth, and Earth protects its own. I felt a sensation I hadn't known in centuries. Pride, not for my species, but for theirs. Of course, not all shared that sentiment. Within days, half the council was calling Earth a hazard to galactic peace. The other half began preparing their own containment contingents. That's when the Teldari moved. You may not know them. Be thankful. The Teldari are not conquerors, not warmongers, but scholars. fanatical scholars. To them, Mason was not a threat. He was a variable, one that needed control. They deployed a temporal nullifier, illegal, unsanctioned, capable of halting time within a 30-meter radius for up to 6 seconds, enough to separate the armor from its host, or so they thought. They deployed it during a human diplomatic tour. 6 seconds passed, and then, nothing. The armor absorbed the pulse, not blocked, not deflected, absorbed. It hummed once, then unleashed a sonic resonance that shattered every recording device in the vicinity. Mason, standing in the middle of the press crowd, raised his hand and muttered, "Did someone just throw a flashbang?" He didn't even know what had happened. That was the terrifying part. The armor was not just protecting him, it was evolving around him, reading the threat, learning, adapting, and humanity had just learned how to stand up. It was the speech that changed everything. Not a declaration of war, not a plea for peace. It was a statement of fact, a line drawn in the fabric of space. The United Human Assembly, in a surprising move of planetary unity, summoned a special session. For the first time in their fractured history, Earth's most powerful nations stood behind a single podium. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't long, but it echoed across the galaxy like a seismic tremor. "We are aware that Lieutenant Mason Hale is now host to an entity of unknown ancient origin. We neither sought this nor initiated its arrival, but know this: Earth does not surrender its people. We welcome dialogue. We will not tolerate threats. We are no longer a silent world." That phrase stuck with me. No longer a silent world. For centuries, Earth had been background noise, its signals, its broadcasts, its erratic wars, a primitive planet with potential but no polish. And now here they were, speaking back. The galactic community didn't take it well. Trade with Earth halted overnight. Envoys were recalled. A half-dozen species issued formal sanctions, while another dozen quietly began preparing more kinetic solutions. The armor didn't care. Mason, increasingly calm and composed, had begun walking with a subtle authority. He still gave interviews, still cracked jokes, but there was weight behind his eyes now. Something deep and strange and patient, like he was listening to music no one else could hear. The armor didn't talk often, but when it did, it echoed through him. "The host's evolution is in progress," it said once, during a classified debriefing. "Adaptation exceeds baseline expectation. No rejection present. Synergy optimal." I watched the footage later. Mason sat in silence for several seconds after the armor spoke. Then he looked up. "Did it just say I'm doing a good job?" The scientist laughed nervously. I didn't, because I had begun to notice something no one else had the experience, or paranoia, to recognize. Mason wasn't just adjusting to the armor was adjusting to him, his humor, his tone, his restraint. He didn't lash out at his attackers. He didn't storm embassies. But when the Irinari tried to send a stealth nanite probe into Earth's defense grid, Mason casually raised one finger and the satellite array realigned itself mid-orbit to incinerate the probe. He hadn't been notified. He simply knew. He looked up at the sky and muttered, "Try harder." Earth had gone from footnote to headline. Delegations returned, now cautious. Requests came in, dressed as offers. The very species that had called humans irrelevant now used words like cooperation, joint ventures, and mutual security. And Mason Hale, armored in something older than history, shook their hands. But I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't negotiating from fear. He was choosing who would be allowed to live near Earth. The council chambers were quiet when the footage arrived. Not silent. There is no such thing in a chamber filled with a dozen species and their translators, but something close. A respectful kind of horror. The Varelian sovereignty had acted without consensus. Impatient with Earth's defiance, emboldened by their own fading empire, they decided to act alone. The logic was ancient and stupid. Kill the host, contain the artifact, and spin a story afterward. They deployed what they called a planetary isolator, a weapon designed not to destroy, but to erase, fold a 30-kilometer region of space into a compression field so dense that it implodes into dimensional static. They aimed it directly at the outskirts of Washington, D.C. No warning, no ultimatum, just a quiet trigger pull from 4 sectors away. The weapon never fired. Not because it failed. Because something got to it first. 30 seconds before activation, the entire Varelian command ship was frozen mid-action. Its internal systems locked, its captain mid-blink, its gunners in the act of inhaling. I do not use that word lightly. Frozen, suspended. Then, in the orbit above their own capital world, he descended. Mason Hale. Not in a shuttle, not in a ship. He arrived alone. The footage is hard to describe. Not because it's unclear, but because it's too clear. Mason dropped from interstellar space like a thunderbolt. The armor, fully awakened now, flared with symbols none of us had seen. Symbols that flickered across wavelengths, languages, and dimensions. He landed silently on the command ship's hull. No sound. No vibration. Just presence. He spoke, broadcasting in Galactic Standard, English, and 3 other languages we hadn't taught him. Earth didn't ask for war. You brought it to our doorstep. This is your only warning. He raised a single hand. The planetary isolator, the weapon once hailed as undefeatable, folded in on itself like wet paper. Not detonated, not destroyed. Simply disassembled at the quantum level. Then he vanished. No explosion, no hyperlight trail, just absence. The Varelians surrendered 3 hours later, unprompted. And the Council? They finally understood what we were dealing with. Not a weapon, not a soldier, not even a species. A statement. The armor had not found a wielder. It had found a mirror. And Mason Hale, flawed, defiant, and gloriously human, had become the first being in our history to be treated by the galaxy with reverence born not of power, but of restraint. And that terrified us more than any war ever could. The galaxy held its breath. There were no missiles, no counterstrikes, no demands, just quiet. The Varelians, once so loud with declarations of dominance, transmitted a single word to the Galactic Council: withdrawal. They recalled their fleets, abandoned their posts, closed their embassies. Their ambassador issued an official apology, 3 sentences long, delivered through a trembling voice, and was never seen again. But it wasn't their fall that stunned us. It was Mason Hale's silence. No victory parade, no threat-laden speech, no demand for reparations. He returned to Earth, walked off a private landing platform in the Mojave, nodded at the armed guard like he'd just come back from the grocery store, and disappeared into classified debriefings. I watched him step onto the soil. The armor rippled across him like water over living muscle, still adapting, still sinking. Its surface no longer shifted wildly. It pulsed now, steady like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him, but wasn't foreign either. They had become one. And yet, he smiled. When a child approached the fence line with a homemade sign, "Thank you, Mr. Hale," he stopped. Kneeling down, the armor melted away from his face. He winked, said nothing. The child waved, delighted. The fence guard was less delighted, but that was the moment that rippled outward across space. He was still human, not a god, not a weapon. A man who could vaporize a fleet and still notice a child's gratitude. That terrified more species than the Varelian weapon ever could. The council met in emergency session. For the first time in 600 years, the quorum was fully present. No remote feeds, no proxies, no ceremonial appearances. Even the Inkalari Grand Consulate sat in attendance. I sat with them, but I didn't feel like one of them anymore. We had all misjudged Earth, grossly. We thought them emotionally unstable. We called them chaotic, dangerous, barbaric. But maybe it was their chaos, their contradictions, that made them the only ones the armor could trust. No species had ever housed such empathy next to violence, such patience next to defiance. One delegate said it plainly: if he had struck first, we would have declared war. But because he didn't, we can never again risk provoking him. And so we voted. Not on sanctions, on recognition. Earth was granted full status as a sovereign strategic species. The first species in over a millennium to enter the Council not as petitioners, but as a consequence of our own fear. Mason did not attend the ceremony. Instead, he sent a recording. No flags, no chest pounding, just a simple message. We didn't ask for this. We didn't want it. But we're here now. And we won't be ignored again. That was it. And across the stars, silence answered. There was a time I thought power was loud. I thought it flashed, roared, burned, carved its name into the sky. That was how the old empires rose, how the Enkalari earned their seat among the stars. But watching the council now, I see the truth I was never taught. Real power does not scream. It waits. The official apology came during a closed chamber session, recorded, encrypted, and later broadcast only because Earth insisted on transparency. It was a spectacle, but not a performance. Each species sent its ambassador to stand, one by one, and speak words they'd never imagined saying to a race they once labeled undeveloped. We misjudged your people. We violated the sanctity of your sovereignty. We failed to understand the will of the armor and your right to wield it. Some sounded sincere. Others recited with dead eyes and bitter pride, but none dared offer conditions. Mason wasn't present, of course. He was somewhere above, not in orbit, beyond it. The armor had begun constructing something. We didn't know what. A platform, a beacon, a sanctuary. Earth's officials claimed it was a communications node. The rest of us quietly called it a citadel. From its surface, signals were transmitted across hundreds of worlds. Languages long thought extinct, dialects that even the archivists couldn't decode. Some said it was teaching, others that it was warning. And Mason? He no longer gave interviews, no more press conferences. He walked alone, surrounded only by silence and symbolism. His legend, however, did not stay still. Whole planets began naming children after him. Militaries updated doctrine with his tactics. A fringe cult on Galaxy III carved miniature suits of the armor from obsidian and whispered that the ascendant human had come to reset the galactic balance. I expected Earth to reject this worship. They didn't, not because they wanted it, because they feared what would happen if they denied it. The Council, too, adjusted. Earth now held a permanent seat, one with veto power. Ambassadors that once mocked Terran diplomats now adjusted their robes and practiced smiling. Human delegations arrived with confidence, not curiosity. And I requested reassignment, not out of shame, out of exhaustion. The Enkalari had once taught that only the ancient were wise. But age, I've learned, is no guarantee of understanding. Mason Hale did more in 1 year than my people had in 10,000. And yet, he remains painfully human, still flawed, still doubting. I saw it in his eyes the last time we met, briefly as he passed through a diplomatic corridor without guards. He paused, looked at me, said nothing, but the armor shifted, just slightly between us, as if it remembered my arrogance. I bowed my head, not out of fear, out of respect. I write this now not as a diplomat, nor even as a Enkalari. I write it as something far rarer, a witness. I was there when the galaxy forgot how to laugh at Earth, when the jokes turned to silence, and the silence to caution. I watched as a man in fatigue stood taller than species who had bent suns to their will. And I watched as we all hesitated. You must understand what that means in galactic terms. We, the old ones, the civilized, had always assumed fear belonged to the lesser. That caution was for the weak. But now, caution is survival. Mason Hale never asked for the armor. He never begged for glory or recognition. He could have shattered entire fleets. Instead, he waved at children behind fences. He could have demanded tribute. Instead, he drank instant coffee in a hangar while reading paperback novels. The armor, I've come to believe, didn't choose a conqueror. It chose a contradiction. Humans love without understanding. They fight while terrified. They mourn in real time and still make jokes during war. Their leaders are chaotic, their governments fragile, their history stained with blood and brilliance alike. And perhaps that is exactly what the armor needed. Not perfection, not order, flexibility. No other species would have survived the bond. We proved that in our arrogance. The armor destroyed philosophers, generals, ascended minds. But Mason? He absorbed it like breath. Now, Earth stands at the center of things. Not because of conquest, but because of fear wrapped in respect. There are whispers of new factions forming, species aligning with Terran policies, trade corridors shifting around Earth as a new gravitational center. Old empires now hold their tongues before speaking too loudly within Terran range. But that is not what keeps me awake at night. It's the question: what happens when humanity stops restraining itself? If this was them at peace, what would their wrath look like? I suspect we will never find out. Not because they lack the capacity, but because, God's help us, they're better than we are. And if that doesn't terrify you, if that doesn't send a shiver through every diplomatic bone in your body, then you haven't been paying attention. So I return now to my homeworld, changed. I came to Earth to study an insignificant species. I leave understanding that I have been living in the shadow of giants. Giants who wear humor like armor, who cry without shame, and who never wanted power, but carry it now in silence. Etched across the stars, in the shape of a man,